All right, welcome to Tommy's Take. Thank you for being here with me for another video. And if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to the channel. As you know, it really helps the channel to grow. Please subscribe. Please like the video, smash the like button, and also comment down below. Now, we have a nice video for you, an interview. Mario Naufel is interviewing Trita Parsi, and they're going to be discussing the Iran war with the United States and where we are with that. So, without further ado, let's get into the interview.
I'm good. I sent your team a message. Well, we're live, right?
You can tell me what the message,
right.
Yeah, but you can tell me.
No, I just said, I don't think that much has happened. Yeah, I didn't know if that much has happened.
I'll tell you what happened. You what happened. Just as we're going live, Mohsen Rezai acted as Mohsen Rezai would act. So he gave a speech in an interview. So the US has informed, and another piece of news broke. I don't know what the source of this one. I just got it now. So the piece of source, the piece of news came in. You might know about it. The US has informed the mediators that Trump does not want to return to the MOU, and Iran says it will not engage in any negotiations before all clauses of the MOU are completely implemented. Meanwhile, in an interview with Mohsen Rezai, I got a few quotes here. The most important quote is him saying, "Sooner or later, we will send Netanyahu to hell where he belongs." Also, other points he said in that interview: our relationship with the Lebanese people is historical and deep-rooted, and we will defend Lebanon with our might and provide it with support. One of the conditions of the MOU is that America must permanently end the war throughout the West Asia, especially in Lebanon. One of our conditions is that Israel must withdraw from the territories that are seized, and that the territories of Lebanon and also Gaza must be liberated. And he says, as we have said before, Beirut is definitely considered a red line, and Iran will respond directly to any aggression against it. Since we have imposed this equation, no Israeli attacks have occurred on Beirut. So I think the big question is, because while Rezai says all this, Lebanon's getting bombed, and the bombing is just escalating every day that passes. I think today is the most extensive bombing we've seen since the major ceasefire, I think since the MOU, except the day where there's maybe soldiers that got killed with the IED. But especially since that event, it really got much worse than it was a few weeks ago. So I think the big question is something people were debating a couple of months ago, a few weeks ago. People have stopped talking about it, is whether what's happening in Lebanon will eventually involve Iran and eventually drag Iran and Israel into a war.
Yeah. So I think when we spoke on Tuesday, I did mention to you that even if the Strait issue is resolved, it won't resolve anything, because I don't see the Iranians agreeing to go back to an MOU minus Lebanon, because that would be the situation that they open the Strait, the blockade is lifted, but nothing happens on the Lebanese front, would mean a return to the MOU minus Lebanon. It's just not acceptable to the Iranians. And I think we're seeing further evidence of that now. Of course, some of the statements that Rezai say have been said before, but in practice, we have seen that when push comes to shove, Lebanon is crucial from a security standpoint for the Iranians. Gaza is not. Gaza is desirable. I'm sure they would be very happy to get credit for having pushed the Israelis out of Gaza, but they don't have that capacity. I mean, in southern Lebanon through Hezbollah, they have a presence. That's not the case in Gaza. It never really was the case in Gaza. Despite the fact that they had a relationship with Hamas, the relationship between Iran and Hamas is nowhere near the same relationship that Iran has had over the course of the entire existence of Hezbollah, since Iran itself played a critical role in establishing Hezbollah. So I'm not surprised to see this. In regards to Trump's message on the MOU, this is definitely the message that is being sent right now. Trump is not interested in a deal. He's not interested in going back to the MOU. He's not interested in diplomacy at this point. And this means that a lot of the diplomacy that currently is being conducted by Iran and Oman, for instance, is either, at least for the Iranian side, I think is done knowing very well that the US side is not going to accept it. But they're doing it to show their own domestic audience that they are pursuing diplomacy and that the problem is on the US side. And they're doing it for the regional audience, particularly for the GCC audience, in the sense that they're coming to an agreement on something on the Strait, that is through the Omanis, acceptable for most of the GCC as well. But the blockage is that Trump right now doesn't want to have a deal. And I think Trump's strategy, particularly with these sanctions, and I think I mentioned it to you on Tuesday, I'm left with the impression that this is much more bark than bite, and that the aim actually is to create a situation that leaves the impression that the US is on the aggressive side, has the initiative, but in essence, they want to keep a stable status quo up until the midterm elections. No deal, no negotiations, no headlines, no escalation. Keep Iran, the Strait, all of that issue off of the front pages and the third and the fourth pages up until the midterms for electoral reasons. And then after the midterms, it's not clear to me as to whether the administration wants to go back to an escalatory situation or if they want to pursue diplomacy. But right now, I'm not seeing any signs that they're interested in anything, diplomacy or escalation. And a lot of this sanction stuff, I'm not saying it's not going to have any bite, but I don't think the administration deliberately, actually, they're not pursuing the real bite that they potentially could have, because they know that the Iranians would counter-escalate in that situation.
There was a report that came out today, I think, by, let me see who it was. The Wall Street Journal. Oh, the Wall Street Journal is the one that reported that Trump doesn't want to go back to the MOU. The other report is by The Atlantic. As I said, the Trump administration just wants the Iran war to fade from the headlines. And that reminds me of something George Gammon told me yesterday, is that the sanctions are not meant to really pressure Iran. They know, the American administration, they know it won't work, and they know they have limitations in being able to implement them. So the objective now is just to gain time, do something that would gain political points at limited cost, which is these sanctions, Operation D-Day. But essentially, Trump has given up on Iran. And this is what we're seeing right now, what we're witnessing right now, is the US walking away, but walking away with, a show as well.
Yeah, temporarily walking away. I don't think the administration has the expectation that this will enable them to truly walk away, which means that they can just completely disengage from it. I don't think that's going to happen. That option did exist back in February, March. It doesn't exist any longer at this point. But I do think that for now, this is absolutely clear. They don't, and I think when it says taking off the headlines, I think it's very important to understand. They're going to try, this gets all involved and entangled in domestic politics, but they're going to come out with all kinds of messages of trying to shift the blame for the inflation and everything to other things. And it's actually very important for them that as little as possible about the war is written in American papers as we approach the midterm elections, so that there is no connection between the two. If there was active diplomacy, it would still generate headlines. If there was active warfare, clearly would generate headlines. And if there's like a going back and forth between the two, it's the same thing. But if they can just create a stable situation that is as uneventful as possible, they will manage to get it out of the headlines. And I think this is what they're aiming for. And I think this is what they're aiming for right now.
And do you think, what's the likelihood in your view, we return to a war between Iran and the US? And I ask you this question every month or two. And what about Iran and Israel?
So let me start off Iran and Israel. The Israelis are, as you mentioned, going further north. It may be true that they haven't hit Beirut, and it is true. Whether it is because of the Iranian red line or not is not entirely clear to me. But I think they're inching closer. And I think from the Israeli side, they do want to continue this war. They just want to do it at the right moment, at the right time, with the right circumstances with the United States. They are now just a month away or so from their own elections, or 2 months. So all of that brings in different issues. And I think under normal circumstances, doing another attack on Iran is not necessarily bad politics in an Israeli election. But because of the fact that the perception in the Israeli public is that the first war in June of last year was a success, the second one is not a success. And Netanyahu will not want to do anything that is not conclusive and highly successful. He needs something major. And I don't think he has anything right now. So I don't see a high likelihood of this happening before October. After October, I think the likelihood dramatically increases, because from the Israeli side, this is unfinished business. And they certainly are not going to accept a return to an MOU in which the American side accepts an Iranian presence, an Iranian influence in Lebanon, and pushes for something that the US never pushes on the Israelis, which is a withdrawal without having completely disarmed whoever the Israelis want to disarm. Look what's happening in Gaza. There's no withdrawal until Hamas disarms. I mean, what's left of Hamas, we don't even know, but they have to disarm. This sense that Israel is the exceptional country that doesn't have to manage threats. It just has to eliminate threats. And the US is in support of that. So that for Israel to withdraw, it means that the other side has to be completely eliminated as having a military potential. But here with the MOU, there was no demand for such a disarmament of Hezbollah. It was a demand for the war to end, and that meant that Israel had to leave Lebanon and Hezbollah had to stop shooting at Israel, which is completely understandable. Of course, Hezbollah should not be able to shoot at Israel if the Israelis have withdrawn. But that's very different from saying Hezbollah cannot have the capacity of deterring Israel. And the Israelis were very upset that the US essentially had adopted a posture vis-a-vis Israel and a demand structure vis-a-vis Israel that he has not demanded of Israel for a very long time. And to be clear, the American approach in the past is part of the reason why we're in this complete mess, because it meant that it was giving the Israeli carte blanche. Israel had a right to security in a manner that ensured that everyone else was insecure. You approach that approach, that policy, you're going to create instability in the region.
Would Israel do something in Lebanon even if the US does not okay it? If the US explicitly says, don't do this, like they told them not to attack Beirut, like they told them to stop advancing, like they forced them to abide by the ceasefire a few months ago, would the Israelis, not listen to Daddy Trump?
So it's different with Lebanon than it is, for instance, with Iran. I find it very unlikely that the Israelis would do something major with the Iranians. That, first of all, operationally, it's very difficult for the Israelis to do without coordination with the US. What the Israelis can do in Lebanon is very different because they can operationally do a lot without any American involvement. But what we have constantly seen is that the Israelis test the American red lines. They test the American statements. Are they really serious? When push comes to shove, are they really going to take a fight with Israel on this or that issue? And on Iran, because it's more complex, because it requires some coordination with the US, then I find it unlikely. On Lebanon, I find it extremely likely that if the Israelis want to do something, even if the American side has said no, that currently the Israelis interpret the American no as being extremely wishy-washy. And to be frank, they're probably right.
If the Israelis continue bombing Lebanon as they are right now and keep moving up north without striking Beirut, at what point do you think the Iranians would get involved militarily?
Well, if they strike Beirut, then it's really going to put the Iranians on the spot. And I actually don't think that the Iranians would feel like, oh, this is a bad moment to escalate. On the contrary, if the Israelis provide them with an excuse to counter,
but they have an excuse. They have an excuse now. They're striking Lebanon on a daily basis. Something the Iranians.
Yes, but the Iranian red line was not all of Lebanon. Remember, it was Beirut. It was not all of Lebanon.
It was Beirut and also all of Lebanon. They keep saying they want. Well, technically, the red line is pulling out of Lebanon. Depends on which red line. There's many lines.
Yeah. No, but when it comes to what they would respond to, so they have demands that Israel has to withdraw from all of Lebanon, and that was supposed to happen by the end of a successful MOU, not instantaneously. They have a demand of no strikes on Beirut, and they would respond to that. So those are different things. They have a demand for a withdrawal, but didn't mean that if the Israelis are there next week, the Iranians will go to war. But if there is a strike on Beirut, they made it very clear they will respond.
But they have a demand for a ceasefire as well. Sorry to interrupt. But
they have a demand for ceasefire. Yeah, absolutely. But that was a demand within the MOU, and they know that that demand has to be in coordination within an agreement with the United States. So, I mean, bottom line is, if they wanted to go towards a confrontation, yes, I'm sure they could twist their own words and use what the Israelis are currently doing in southern Lebanon to go in that direction. But I think they also want to make sure that their threats are crystal clear and that there's credibility behind them. And as a result, if the Israelis deliberately target something that has been not a red line in terms of this is our demands, for some sort of a future agreement, but a demand on what cannot be done right now, such as an attack on Beirut, then I think the Iranians would respond. I don't think this is a moment in which they would be like, terrible timing, let's not do it. On the contrary, they're getting more and more incentives to do some form of a counter-escalation. But I don't think, for instance, that the economic pressure would put counter-escalation against Israel very high up on the list of options for them. But if, in combination with the economic pressure, you have the Israelis doing things that clearly cross the Iranian red lines in Beirut, then I think it's a different story.
Now, what about the US and Iran? You still worried that we could, after the midterms, the US could strike Iran again? Because we got a report on how depleted the munitions are, treated like it's insane. There's a report that came out today, I'm sure you've seen it, by let me see where it is. There it is. That's according to AP, Associated Press. US Patriot interceptor stockpiles in Europe are at a beyond critical levels due to the Iran war. A senior US official said in the event of a Russian ballistic missile attack on a military headquarters or power plant in NATO, NATO would be in a similar position to Ukraine and be forced to take punch after punch in the mouth. And we talk about NATO, big bad NATO that Russia would never dare to strike. In Europe, the American military definitely does not have enough patriots to stop any sustained ballistic missile attack and would have very limited capability to defend against a single ballistic missile strike or a stray Russian missile that goes off course, the US official told AP.
It is. I mean, and again, the depletion is now beyond the depletion in the region. The region has already been depleted. And now a lot of material and assets are being moved from Asia, from Europe, which is then causing a depletion over there. But it also means something else, that in this period, as there is no fighting, as their focus is on the economic warfare, the US is moving assets to the Middle East, causing depletion to move from one area to another. So I think you're going to see an increase of number of interceptors in the Middle East as you see it decrease elsewhere. Now, from a grand strategic American perspective, there's going to be a lot of people in the Pentagon that are going to be very unhappy about this. Because already the NSS of 2025 said that the Middle East is of diminishing strategic importance and that the US should shift towards a hemispheric focus. And instead, we're seeing just 3 months later, a war started with Iran, and now seeing how assets and critical interceptors are being moved from regions that are defined as much more important than the Middle East, taking it from those regions to the Middle East. So it's just throwing good money after bad, essentially. But it does mean that the United States may have a degree of readiness for a third round, which again, I don't think they will do before the midterms, but it would happen after the midterms. And I think the Iranians are going to take that very seriously. The Iranians are, nevertheless, they're planning for the worst case.
Yeah, exactly. But hold on, you still think that there's a possibility for a round 2 or 3, whatever you want to call it, after round 3, after the midterms?
Absolutely. I'm not saying that is a high likelihood. I'm not saying that this is necessarily where you want to take things. I'm not seeing any clear indications as to whether a post-midterm environment, you're going to have the same disinterest in diplomacy as Trump has right now. Again, keep in mind, this is an administration whose strategic compass is the mood of the president on any given day. So he can be very tired of diplomacy right now and then give it another chance 3 weeks from now. He can be gung-ho about war and then after 13s, stop it. There's path dependency level 0 at this point. So as a result of that, I think it would be very, very foolish to think that just because of the depletion of the interceptors, etc., that this would not necessarily lead Trump to move in that direction later on. No guarantee that he would, but I'm just saying ruling it out, I think, would be a huge and very dangerous mistake. Moreover, I think it's also important to recognize if Trump is really humiliated and Republicans really lose in the midterms, the Iranians, I think that that's going to put him in a weaker position, and I think they're going to try to enjoy the humiliation, etc. But I think it may be a miscalculation because Trump in that scenario may actually lash out far more and be far more risk-willing than he has been so far. Look at how he behaved after he lost the elections in November 2020. That's the period we suddenly, without any provocation, was looking for an excuse to start a war with Iran. And it was the Joint Chief of Staff that essentially had to put a stop to that. And he was doing so not for any strategic reasons, but because he thought that it might help him
He
not having
was
to
looking
give up
for
power.
war in 2020, and the Joint Chief of Staff stopped him.
Exactly. And all of that happened after November. And the Joint Chief of Staff was very worried that he was going to try to start a war in order to be able to stay in office and not having to do this peaceful transition of power. My point being is that in that type of a scenario where he's really humiliated
I haven't heard of this story.
Yeah. So this was out in the news that Mark Milley, his biggest concern after the election loss was that Trump was going to try to start a war with Iran for purely political reasons. I mean, beyond
using what justification? Was there any justification? Did Iran do something that Trump was going to use for justification?
He didn't give any details of what the justification was, but I don't think anyone would be particularly concerned that the justification would be the problem. The problem would be that this is just fundamentally, it was not just starting an unconstitutional war, it was to start an unconstitutional war in order to neutralize an election and not have, essentially have an emergency situation in which he wouldn't give up the presidency. So
Mark Milley said, Mark Milley said that.
Yes. So again, folks can look it up. It's all in the public domain. My point being, in those scenarios, that's what we have seen a pattern in which he is more risk willing than ever before. And as a result, after the midterms, he may actually do things that go well beyond what we've seen so far.
That's very reassuring, Trita, that Mark Milley story. Is that a recent story or an old one?
No, this came out. Oh, I don't remember exactly when it came out. It's in his book as well that he published.
Yeah, I'm taking a note to read about it afterwards. All right, let's go into the story on the Saudis. So there's a report by, let's see, Houthis, by New York Times. Saudi appears to be preparing for a renewed war with the Houthis following weeks of attacks targeting Saudi ships, airports, and oil facilities. Analysts warn that the new Saudi campaign could deepen the wider Middle Eastern crisis and potentially open another front in the Iran war. Few believe Riyadh could completely defeat the Houthis. Instead, the likely goal would be to weaken the group and pressure it into a Yemen peace settlement more favorable to Saudi and its Yemeni allies. How worried are you about that? That one worries me a lot more than an Iran-US war.
I wouldn't say that it worries me more, but I am very worried about it because I think the Saudis know very well that they knew how to start a war with Yemen last time around, and it was a hell of a difficulty for them to get out of it. And to restart it again without any clear path out would be a huge mistake. And to do so under circumstances in which they are trying to create a new constellation in the region, new protections through the Mecca Agreement, etc. If it really ends up happening, in my view, would tell you of a degree of desperation on the Saudi side. I don't think this is something they would do because they're, supremely confident. I think it is noteworthy that you have a Mecca Agreement in which these states essentially said that they're going to come to each other's defenses. And you have Houthi attacks on Saudi Arabia, and there's no invocation of the Mecca Agreement. You have Israeli attacks essentially on Turkey, no invocation of the Mecca Agreement. It really raises question marks as to how serious and credible the Mecca Agreement is, or if it's just a stepping stone to something else.
I wonder, when you told me the Mark Milley story, it distracted me of two questions I was thinking as you were talking about a war next year between the US and Iran. It caught me by surprise. What would you give it? I know you don't like numbers, but just for the sake of it, to know where your mind is at, likelihood US-Iran war under Trump again?
Look, I would have to think much more deeper to be able to give you a number.
But could it be above 50-50? Could it be above 50-50 or no?
Oh, certainly could be above 50-50. Absolutely. Because look, if the United States...
It just doesn't make sense.
Well, actually, it does. Look, if the United States continues to say what it currently says, which is it has no interest in lifting the blockade itself is an act of war unless it is endorsed by the UN Security Council, which means that there is an active war. Whether that active war then escalates and you will see more military action, or if it is in some sort of a frozen stage, it was going to be the question. But as long as the blockade is there, at some point, this is going to blow up again. You're not going to have a naval blockade of Iran, and that just ends up becoming a new status quo that keeps on going for 10 years without any consequences. That's just not going to happen. So there's going to have to be a lifting of the blockade, and that's going to require a deal. If they can't get a deal and the blockade is still there, then there's constantly going to be an oscillation between some level of diplomacy and economic warfare and back into military conflict.
What's the point of, I understand this, but they could lift the blockade or keep the blockade and let ships through anyway, as they did before, keep letting ships through while there's a wall of steel blockade. And eventually people will forget about it and he moves on to something else, like the Lake of America, or America Lake, that you think. So he's always got an easy way to distract everybody. When you talk about war, what's the point? Interceptors are catastrophically depleted. The Gulf would just dump treasuries if he does it again. They'll be really pissed more than they were already. And there is no objective he could achieve. What is he going to achieve that he wasn't able to achieve earlier? So that's why I just don't see it. If there's a path forward for war, I'd understand. But there is no path, not even an unlikely path that would yield results. Unless
I'm not arguing against you on those points. I'm arguing against you on those points, drawing the conclusion that as a result, there won't be war. Because the points you just made were also equally true right before the second round started. And the second round
is in the war in February?
No, the second round in my way of counting is what happened was it April? No, hold on. It was in July.
A couple of months ago,
Yeah, a couple of months ago when the MOU broke down and they went back to fighting. And it lasted 13 days because there was really nothing there to be achieved in the first place. But it nevertheless meant that it was a
limited war. The strikes were nothing. They weren't destroying anything significant. They didn't go deep into Tehran.
You didn't ask me if I foresee a large war or a limited war. You asked me war, and limited or large, it's a war. And my answer is it has a likelihood. There is
That's
a likelihood.
Semantics. Fair point. Then I understand. All right, man. Trita, always a pleasure.
Thank you so much
for giving us your time.
Appreciate it. Talk.
All right. There you have it. They said a lot there. A lot going on. As we know, economic D-Day happened. Sanctions, heavy sanctions on Iran. Also, Trump threatening other countries that deal with Iran economically, that they would also be punished. And what's being mentioned here by Parsi is that Trump really has no way out of this war, and that he's done. He is done with Iran. And the only way to save face would be to say, okay, we're done with this war. Now we're doing sanctions, right? This is the next phase, right? Is sanctions. But he believes that this is only being done because we have midterm elections coming up, and he really wants to quiet down the news or Iran war being in the news. And he wants to be able to focus on the midterms because the Republicans, as you know, are in big trouble. A lot of Republicans, independents, are really upset with where Trump has taken this country. So yeah, he doesn't want the Iranian war in the news. He wants that to be forgotten, and he believes that after the midterm election, that Trump may take riskier moves in the Persian Gulf. He may be a lot more riskier. He may be willing to escalate more because the midterms would be behind them. Now, for Iran, they made a threat to Israel. They threatened Israel because Israel is attacking Lebanon, southern Lebanon, and they want to return back to the MOU, and they want Lebanon off the table. They want Israel out of Lebanon. And I think that's fair. And like you said, Iran already has a presence in Lebanon, which makes it easier for them to defend. And Iran looks like they're ready to defend Israel by any means. Not so much Gaza. Would be nice if Gaza, Palestine had a lot more people willing to defend that territory, those people. those people in their country, their nation. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Iran is more focused on Lebanon, and they have their strategic reasons. All right, so tell me what you guys think. Do you think Trump will escalate after the midterms? Do you think he's using economic D-Day and the sanctions to get people to forget about the Iran war because he wants to focus on midterms? As you know, he's going to Texas. He's going to be supporting the I forget if it's for a representative or a senator, but he's going to be supporting some Republican out in Texas. I forgot who it was. So he's going to be campaigning over there. And do you think that after the midterm elections, he's going to really escalate in Iran because now he really has nothing to lose politically? So he could appease his billionaire friends, the oligarchy. But yeah, tell me what you guys think. Do you think Iran is going to stay out of Lebanon or come out of Lebanon? Do you think Iran has enough muscle to keep Israel out of Lebanon? Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, like the channel if you stayed this long. Thank you very much. And we'll see you in the next video. Peace.